Hello, everybody, and welcome to our little stream. I'm Anya. I work at Restream, and here's Pete. For those who doesn't know one of us, but we are going to have this very exciting conversation about career in sales. So, hello, everybody who is joining us today. And hi, Pete. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful today. It's very bright in this room, so I feel good. The lighting is good. I've got this guy over here. So
Nice, nice. Yeah, it's definitely very bright for me as well because I have all this super lights and yeah, very exciting. So as folks are joining in and starting to show up, don't be shy. Say hello in the chat. Feel free to drop any questions about sales, your career, just looking for a job in general, or even any kind of questions for Pete or for me if you happen to have those. But just to get our conversation started, I think we will begin with your story, Pete, and how your career in sales started. So you can walk us through the story, like why do you know a lot about sales and kind of how did you get there? So
sure. Yeah. So I'm sure any folks who will be joining may have heard this one before, so I'll try not to take it too long. But yeah, my career in sales started really started in tech sales back in 2006 when I was looking for a new job and I really wanted to work for what we called at the time a website. And so I was like, oh, I want to go work at a website. And I was looking for some roles. And I came across this website called Yelp, which was very small at the time. It was mainly in San Francisco. And I was like, wow, this would be a great place to work. So they were hiring for some entry-level people. So I applied on Craigslist. I was living in New York at the time, and I applied for an entry-level role in San Francisco, flew out there, got the job, packed up all my stuff in a suitcase, and moved out there to join the team, which was very small at the time. There was just 20 of us at the company. And thank you to my sister Trina, I slept on her couch for 2 months because I didn't have any money, and I was looking for an apartment. And I started my job in cold calling and inside sales, so very entry level. And then I ended up spending 11 years there, growing from an IC to all the way up to a VP role and through management and everything. But yeah, that's where I started my career. And I finally got my own apartment after a couple months, which was nice. And yeah, I could tell you all about that if any of that's interesting, or if anyone who's joined, if you have any questions about that journey specifically, just drop them in the comments. Happy to share more.
absolutely. And to also get us started, feel free to let us know where in the world you are watching us from. I see a couple of folks checking in the chat. I see Tyler saying hello to everyone. I see Sean is here saying Craigslist is great. And yeah, let us know where you are watching us from, country, city, anything. And as we keep talking about sales, yeah, don't be shy to drop your questions, and we'll be happy to address most of them today. That's the goal. It's a Q&A. So yeah, it's a great story. I kind of have I like to ask salespeople if you feel like you have to be like born with that personality, or is that something exercisable? And before we get to some other questions that we actually had submitted earlier, that's kind of like my personal kickoff question. Like,
Sure.
do you have to be specially wired to be a salesperson, or is it
Yeah.
something like you go to the gym, you exercise, and you're great at sales? Ta-da.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, Gary and Jake, who I know those two, they were definitely wired to be salespeople. But for me, I think if I was ever to write a book about all of this, I would probably call it The Reluctant Salesperson, or even The Reluctant Leader, if you will, because I kind of came into leadership on the side. And yeah, so I don't think you have to be born to be in sales. I think you can learn it. The question, I think, and a lot of times when we are hiring entry level salespeople, I would always wonder if they would enjoy the day to day of the job. And so there's like the job and the way you think about it, but then there's like the actual day to day of what you do. So it's whether it's cold calling and reaching out to people and trying to break through and engage with them and start a conversation, whether it's trying to engage with people over email, whether it's presenting over Zoom or something and sharing your product. These are the things that you do day to day. And I think if you like the day to day work of your job, and you get excited about the product that you're selling or the customers that you get to work with and get to know, then I think you can do really well in sales. But I think a lot of times people may start their career in sales and they're not really excited about the product per se. They just kind of ended up at the company, or maybe they, don't like the day to day of the job. And so they get turned off by it. But I think if you can find a role where you like the day to day, where you like the product, you can make it work. So I don't think I was necessarily born to do it. If I hadn't come across such an interesting product, which was Yelp at the time in the early days, I might have left and done something else in my career. It never hurts too. As a kid, I used to love making prank phone calls. So, people who used to like making prank phone calls in the 80s and 90s, they make great salespeople. These days, it's like, do you like talking to your Uber driver? And if you get a
Yeah.
that, that's a good thing to do as well. So, different things, but I'm more of an introvert than an extrovert, honestly. So I'm a little bit of a reluctant salesperson in some ways.
That is very inspiring. I want to make sure we address the questions from the chat and some other great questions that people submitted earlier. But please remind me towards the end of this conversation to ask you what's your favorite phone prank, because I used to do them all the time. That was like literally all I was looking forward to every time I would finish the school stuff. And we had some really elaborate ones. So I would love to hear your favorite. But while you're processing that, let's go ahead and take Gary's question, because it is actually a very nice segue from what you were talking about in terms of hiring people and like kind of understanding if they have the right personality for the job. So from the company's perspective, asks Gary, what leadership needs to do to onboard new sales reps well?
Yeah. So, I think the first thing that the leadership team needs to do is they need to clearly explain what the role is to that person during the interview process. And so you want to be upfront about who you're going to be speaking to, what types of people. You want to be upfront around, is it going to be a lot of outreach and a lot of outbound, or are you going to be mainly, doing demos and handling inbound leads and things like that? So I think to onboard people well, you have to find the right people, the people who are going to enjoy the job and enjoy the day to day, as I said. And I think being upfront about that during the interview process, about the good, bad, and the ugly of the role and of the company. So everyone kind of comes in wide open, eyes wide open, is the first step. So that's the first thing. I think the next thing around that is helping new people really become product experts so they feel comfortable and confident talking to the customers. When someone doesn't understand the product or understand the customers as well, then I think that can be a challenge. And so I think becoming a product expert is important. And then from there, as far as onboarding people, there's a lot, but I think if you can set the expectations right, if you can train them well, then you're kind of off to a good start. The final thing would be setting a relationship of ongoing feedback and coaching. So I think a new leader needs to be clear that, hey, I'm going to be giving you feedback. I want you to seek out my feedback and really make that a positive thing versus a negative thing when there's coaching happening. I think too often, sometimes people don't start the relationship in that way. So when they start to get feedback later in the relationship, that manager rep relationship, it can feel more of like negative, constructive, feedback and things like that. If you can set the relationship up front where we're going to be transparent and you're going to get a lot of coaching and feedback from me, then I think you're setting the rep up to receive that in a more positive way.
Awesome. So many questions coming in. I remember as we were preparing for this, Pete was like, we probably won't have too many live questions. Here we go. The chat is on fire. So we are going to take questions from the chat first, and then we'll come back to some that we prepared that I also think are very interesting. I would love to hear Pete's perspective on that. So let's see. Tyler is asking, what key sales strategies have proven successful for you and your team in acquiring new clients? It's kind of a broad question, but anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, so I actually have a very sort of strong opinion around building your sales strategy and sales process. And I've done this with many startups through the years. For the past 3 or 4 years before joining Restream, I was working with startups. and building these things from scratch. And I think the number one piece of advice that I would give is to, if you have a clear ICP, a clear ideal customer profile that your product can work best with, you've really got to put yourself in their shoes and understand what their buying process looks like. And then you want to match your sales process to their buying process. And so I think that's really important. So whether it's your outreach strategy, what channels are you using for outreach, the sequences of calling, and are you trying to do everything all on one call? Are you doing a discovery call first and then a demo later? How quickly are you getting to pricing in the conversations? Are you multi-threading? So are you selling to one person, or are you selling across multiple people in the organization? All of these things should match the ideal buying process of the customer that you're selling to. And I think too often people think about, well, what sales strategy should I do? What's going to break through? When really they should be thinking about delivering an excellent buying process to their customers. And that's really hard to do. It's not easy to do. It means that you're probably not sending a lot of cold email, because people don't like cold email. So, anyway, lots to think about there. But I encourage anyone who's building a sales process or a strategy from start to actually think about their buyer and the buying process is going to work from them first.
I love that. That's kind of such a specific part of the journey to focus on, but it's so crucial. And I think it applies to everything, B2B, B2C. It doesn't matter what kind of product or service, like whatever your offering is. Like, yeah, if your customer hates the way they are asked to pay, yeah, it's not gonna be great.
Yeah. And
Really good
Anya,
stuff.
your experience in marketing too, it's, if you think about it, the journey that the buyer has goes beyond the interactions that they have with the salesperson, right? And I think the salespeople forget about that sometimes, that they might be doing their own research. They might want to trial the product. There's all this stuff that's happening that's outside of what that salesperson is doing. And so let's think holistically about that buyer journey and create a great experience for them. I think there's a lot of opportunity for improvement there. I think a lot of B2B companies have been doing that wrong over the past 5 years, and they've had a bunch of capital, so they haven't realized how bad of a job they were doing. So I think we're going to see like a big change over the next couple of years. The companies who do that right from a sales and marketing perspective will win. Everyone else will die.
It's a great prediction.
Yes.
But so true, bold and true.
We'll see what
Love it.
happens.
Exactly. Here's Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
And he is curious about your perspective and advice for folks who are looking to evolve beyond the day-to-day sales world into sales leadership. We actually had that question, how to transition from sales rep to
Mm-hmm.
manager. So that's kind of pulling on that thread a little bit. So eventually strategic revenue roles as well. So very, very good question, especially since Bobby's asking in particular what main attributes that support that growth do you
Mm-hmm.
typically see? So
Yeah. So I guess the first thing is kind of asking yourself, why sales leadership, or why strategic or enterprise sales role? Like, why is that interesting for you? Because I think sometimes you have people who are maybe running away from an individual contributor role and are just looking for anything that could be next. And that's, that makes sense, right? There's only so many years you could spend just smiling and dialing if you're in an inside sales role or sending a bunch of emails or what have you. So having that progression makes sense. But, really thinking about, okay, do I want to have a career change, which I see moving from an individual contributor into a management role as actually being a change in your career. So you're doing something different, less of a sort of progression. And the way that you'll be spending your time, the skills that you need to tap into to be good at sales leadership, they're just very different from the typical IC role. And so I think you have to ask yourself, kind of, do I want to start at square one? So if you've gotten really good at being an individual salesperson and then you move into sales leadership, it's almost like starting over. And of course, a lot of times you can't move into sales leadership unless you have the experience, right? So you're building on top of that, but you're going to have to learn all types of new skills. As an example, individual salespeople often struggle at giving, a wide set of feedback when they move into leadership. They share what worked for them, not always thinking about that individual and what's going to work for them in their approach to the job. And those types of transitions and mental changes you have to have are really important when you move into leadership. So I think thinking about that, and then from there, there's a lot of work to be done around that, a lot of work you can do. I think you do have to advocate for yourself within the company and understand if there's a role internally within the company or if you have to move externally to do that. But yeah, I could talk about this one for days, but I think step number one is really thinking strategically about what the next role is for you, not just saying, hey, what's in front of me that maybe I could do, taking a little bit of a broader look.
Got you. Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think it is very much applicable to pretty much any role I can think of. A
Mm-hmm.
very common scenario for this is also engineering. For example, you are in engineering and then you become engineering manager. And all of a sudden, there's this giant shift from being a contributor and writing code into actually managing people, QAing, making sure you remove blockers, a completely different job, even though you would think that you're so qualified to do that. You've done this for years, but it is very much of a start over. I agree. Good stuff. Um, there is a question from Alex.
Hey,
I'm
Alex.
so I'm so glad you're here, Alex. Thanks for watching us. Alex is our CEO at Restream, so it's always good to see him. And he has a great question. Can you provide any advice on how to train yourself for a sales role? Do you know any exercise that could help beginners in sales to recognize sales signals? This is kind of coming back to the question we had, like nature versus nurture. Any practical exercises? I would love to. I'm making notes. I would love to write them down.
Yeah, so I think thing number one around this is practicing. So as far as how to train yourself for a sales role, you definitely want to practice. So when I was training people on how to make cold calls, I would tell them, okay, here's your script. Go practice with your dog. Go practice with your roommate. Go record yourself and listen to how you sound. The pacing in which you speak, the pauses, all those kind of things. It just takes practice, and you can practice on the job and fall on your face with live customers, which will happen, or you can practice on your own. And so I think that definitely plays out in today's world where you're doing a lot of things over video conference, recording yourself and practicing there. And you'd be surprised at how many people don't do that, because who wants to spend your nights and weekends doing that? But the people who really want to be great, they will. So that's thing number one, is practice. On your question around the sales signals and recognizing sales signals, so I think one of the most important things around sales that everyone talks about is confidence. And so being really confident when you're speaking to a customer that this product is going to be a great fit for them, it's going to help them, it's going to bring value to them. I think if you have that level of confidence, it just changes everything in the way you talk, the way you sound, the questions you ask, your willingness to be assertive or direct, which is very important sometimes. And so when I look for sales signals, when I look for triggers that might say, oh, this customer could be a great fit, or maybe this customer isn't thinking about this way that this product could help their business, I'm really looking for things that I personally believe in, that I understand, a vision that I have for this customer and the way they can use our product. And then when I feel good about that and I feel strong about that, I see that as a signal or a trigger. And then now it's my role to simply communicate that to someone who maybe doesn't see it yet. So, it's a little bit sort of up here, but if you think about it practically as far as how to look for signals, you're really looking for things that make sort of the light bulb go off in your brain around, wow, we could actually really help them with this thing that they care about. And just realizing that they don't have time to stop their day to day and analyze these types of things, right? And so it's your job as a salesperson to be that change agent and bring that to them. And so those are the kind of things I look for, almost like you're being like a consultant for their business in some way, and things that they don't know. So those are the kind of signals and triggers that I look for.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And just kind of to take it a little, like one little step back, like what it takes to be confident about product. And it was my very little experience in sales, kind of like very experimental level. I feel it really helps to know the product like from inside out. If you're just so knowledgeable and you know every detail, it's just so much easier to be confident. Versus when you're like, oh, I don't know how it works myself, but I'm gonna try. And
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like hype yourself up and be obsessed about it. I've definitely seen that work a couple of times with me when people were just like this girl is so riled up about Restream. There must be something about it. So we should at least give it a chance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that really, it really helps to drink that Kool-Aid and convince yourself that what I'm selling is literally the best thing in the world. It's such a game changer.
Yeah,
This is
yeah. And it's like you know something, you know stuff that they don't know. I mean, you give
yeah,
yourself that credit, right? Like give yourself the credit that they may be the expert in whatever industry they're in, but you are the expert in whatever it is, marketing or live streaming or demand gen or whatever the situation is. And you can bring ideas, you can bring solutions to them, you can bring things that are going to help them hit their goals. You know stuff they don't know. So have that confidence to share those things
yeah.
when you're having those conversations.
Absolutely. And here's Alex echoing this. Do you agree that you need to be an expert in product and need to visualize applicable use cases on the fly? Exactly. That's kind of what I was saying, that it
Mm-hmm.
really helps with that confidence. So confidence is kind of like that vehicle that allows you to be good at sales. But what takes you to that place of confidence is that knowledge of product and this kind of trust that you will see the opportunity and you will connect those dots for the client when it comes to even like some unique use cases. And we had that plenty of times during our calls recently, which is so
Yeah,
exciting.
yeah. And I think
And
it's curiosity, right? Like, so you're curious about their business, you're curious about what they care about, curious about what's made them successful up to this point. And
yeah,
so I think you do have to enjoy the customers that you speak with. You do have to be interested in the industries you're selling into. And then if you do that, then you'll just be walking around on the weekend and you'll see some business and you'll be like, oh, I have this great idea of how they could be using our product. And those things just sort of start to naturally come to you if you're interested in the industry that you're selling into, if you're interested in the customers. And so I think that's really important. I think people who don't have that are going to really struggle to be great at sales, and they should go leave that company and go join a company where they're excited about the product, they're excited about the customers, and they have a vision that they want to bring to their customers that's going to really help them.
that is so true, 100%. I would like to take us, as we're nearing kind of like the middle of our conversation, I would like to take
Mm-hmm.
us to a place. It's actually also one of my favorite questions about sales. It's one of the preset questions that folks submitted to us earlier. Um, and it is why every great employee, not just sales team, is really actually in sales. I love to think about this from this perspective because I'm a marketer myself, and I cannot think of any role in the company that is not involved in sales. Kind of coming back to what you were saying about the holistic experience of a customer. So can you comment on that, especially for folks who are watching us right now and they're like, yeah, fun conversation, you guys are interesting, but I'm not in sales, so this is not for me. Can we kind of debunk that and talk about why this is literally for everybody?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the way to think about this is you're essentially, I mean, so in my world of working in startups and basically bringing new products to market, like that's what I see as my job, is to take a product that doesn't exist, and sometimes it's a whole category of products, and bring that to market. And so if that's the world that you live in, where basically there's a whole world of customers who could be using your product but aren't today, then of course you're in sales, right? You're getting behavior to change. People are going to change their behaviors. So whether it's how you design the product, what feature do you build next, what does the UI UX look like? If you're in marketing, what does that marketing story look like? What is our focus as far as ICP? All of these kind of things. These are all part of bringing a new product to market, and you're basically asking people to change their behavior. And so I think if you start to think about it that way, you're not just building a product, you're changing the way that they operate. If it's a business product, you're changing the way they do a certain process with their business. You're empowering them to do something they've never been able to do before. And so in that way, you are, in sales, right? You're getting them to do something that they haven't done before. And so the way that you design the product, the features you build, so on and so forth, you're in sales in that way. And so what's the point of building a product that no one uses, right? And so you've got to design it in a way where you're getting them to actually change their behavior. So I think that mentality, particularly in startups, is really helpful when people have it across the company, not just the sales team. And so that would be my perspective on how everyone is actually in sales. Of course, if you're a founder, you're on an early team, you know this already. You're in sales because it's sort of everyone all at once working together to make things happen, and anyone's willing to jump on a call with the customer. As companies get larger, people start to get more siloed and they forget that mentality. And that's obviously a problem and should change when you can do it.
Yeah, I like to hear. It's one of my favorite things to do to hear from like younger, more entry level employees. Things like, "Oh, I don't like sales. It's not for me because I'm not doing this like pitchy salesy stuff, whatever that means
Mm-hmm.
to people." And I always like to also bring up some examples like, well, sales is not just what you're envisioning in your car dealership experience, right? Like it's a lot of times it's psychology. It's like your ability to convince somebody of something that you firmly and truly believe in. It's also a lot of times education, because a lot of times sales is just telling the person that what he's looking or she is looking to do is possible with your product. So
Mm-hmm.
there's so many different angles to that, and that's very exciting. I would like to hear your answer to this question too, because I think it's really
Sure.
interesting before we get in the chat. The weirdest non-sales lesson you learned along the way that helped you to grow your own career. So kind of coming back to career in sales, because that's where you
Mm-hmm.
spend your life, but also something that's not a sales lesson.
Yeah. Well, I guess my controversial answer to this is to actually ignore a lot of the advice that you get from people. Because I think generally people don't really understand your situation. And when they give you advice, they're giving you advice based off of like their worldview and what they've experienced. And so, I think there's a difference between like following advice and having like a value system and having values that you believe in. And so my parents, I believe, gave me great values. And they raised me well, and I have certain values, and they help guide me and motivate me and help me make smart decisions in my life. And they are sort of these lessons, if you will, that I've sort of learned and take with me. But it's not specific advice. My parents have given me some good advice. They've given me some bad advice as well, specifically because it's just coming from their worldview. But they gave me great values. And so when it comes to specific advice, I think people need to be very careful. And sometimes what you need to do is just sit there and smile and listen, and then just go do whatever the F you were going to do anyway. Right. Because sometimes, like, you have to just have a vision for what you're going to do and take in people's feedback and ideas, but have the confidence that I know what I need to do. And so I'll kind of throw that out there as just a general thing. But I do think, as far as specific advice, one of the most important things you have to do is get yourself in the right mindset to do the work. And so whatever advice that you get that can help you get in the right mindset to do well and to really excel are important. So, I would say laying out your clothes in the morning. I love to lay out my clothes in the morning. I like to wake up and I don't have to think about it. And I'm prepared, and there are my clothes in the morning, and it sets the right tone for the day. And that sort of preparation flows through my entire day. I'm always prepared for every call that I go on. I've always done the research. I'm always prepared to questions. If I'm going into an interview, I already know who I'm interviewing. I know what I want to dig into. I've looked at their resume. And so my superpower, if you will, or the weirdest thing, is sort of like just being really, really, really prepared. Because again, I think that goes back to my confidence around things. And so lay out your clothes in the morning would be my weird advice for you. And then also to focus on the values that will help make you successful, not the specific advice that you get from people.
I love that. And it's funny because we're similar in that sense. Like I have a thing for making my bed every morning. Like I can't,
Good
it
on
doesn't
you.
matter. It's such, at this point, it's such an obsession that like everyone makes fun of me in the family. But like it's just exactly what you were describing. It's just one of those things that I want to feel like, there's only always one thing on the to-do list that's done once you
Mm-hmm.
make your bed, and also it makes you feel like organized. But it's in terms of laying your clothes, I always pick up my clothes the day before, because it takes me so long to figure it out that like if I just spend the time in the evening, it just frees up like a little bit of the morning for kind of like more urgent stuff. So it's like really, really fun shares that right here. So appreciate it. There are a couple more questions in the chat. We'll definitely
Hmm.
get to them, but I want to make sure we take this one. It is also very typical, kind of like sales, stereotypical sales thinking about people wearing many hats. And that's a question for
Hmm.
you, Pete. How and when you learn to wear many hats, and how does it benefit you, and how would that benefit anybody?
Yeah, let's see. Well, what hats are we talking about? Are we talking about, the dad hat, the plus the
That
work
could be it.
hat, or are we talking
Yeah.
about, having multiple roles?
I mean, even
Um,
within the company right now, kind of like watching
mhm,
you join Restream relatively recently, but still, you're involved in so many different things, right? Like you
mhm.
are a salesperson, you are involved in leadership team decisions. You're a little bit of a product guy helping with the pricing page. You are a little bit of a customer success person because you jump on those demos. So that's just kind of like a very on the surface level what I am seeing. And then
Mhm.
yes, we have all these other roles of like family, our social roles, and kind of like our aspirations within the company. I definitely want to fix this. I want to make sure that this looks better and I can improve that. So I guess we can start there and see where it takes us.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as many hats, yeah, I think it's an understanding of like what you can do, what you can control, where you can help, and where you need to sort of take a step back and let someone else take the lead. And so I try and always be there, for people from a support perspective, like cross functionally. I try to share ideas in a way where it's, hey, here's something, and you take it, for what you will, and sort of ultimately it's your decision. And so, I think, doing that and kind of keeping your eyes open to what's going on cross functionally is really important when you work at a company, but doing it in the right way where, you know, having one point person for each sort of key project or key decision or what have you, I think is really important. I think if you don't have that, it really slows things down. So you want to think about, especially when you're in a leadership position, how can you empower people, so people feel like, okay, they know they're in charge and they can go and do their thing and make their decision on their own, without you slowing them down, but you're hopefully helping them along the way, as well. And so, I'm a big fan of working cross functionally. I never saw myself as sort of tied to any one department, but I definitely, choose my battles. Right. And it's like not every idea that I have gets shared, and not every project that's going on do I personally get involved in. Um, but I do try and help, and share ideas and get involved, where I can. As far as like, many hats, I think that mentality of like, okay, there's the stuff that I'm purely responsible for. And then there's the other stuff that like someone else is responsible for. I think that is really, helpful in that, it sort of relieves the pressure a little bit and everyone knows what they're doing. Where is if everyone's working on everything together, it can feel really overwhelming. But ultimately when there's a certain point person, I think that really helps, from a wearing many hats perspective. Um, yeah, as far as like being a dad, I mean, we could spend an hour talking about that and that hat that I wear. Obviously, it's the most important, hat that I wear. But I will say, like, you have to be happy in your life outside of your home life as well, I think, in order to be a good dad. And so I think making sure that you're feeling fulfilled in your career or whatever else that you're spending your days doing, is really important. And I think, ultimately you'll end up being a role model, for your kid, and they'll tell and they can see if, you don't like your job or you don't like what you're doing, or if you feel like you're not maximizing, your potential or what have you. If they're young, they may not see it right now, but they feel it. But when you're older, they will actually see it. And so I do think that, although that's the most important hat that I wear, I do need to focus on, things outside of being a dad in order to be a good role model for my son. And so, yeah, I'm doing the best I can. But, so I do think about that as well, from a prioritization standpoint.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it is so easy to take your frustrations, bring them home if something is not working out. So yeah, happy and fulfilled life at work, I think, is a recipe for happier life at home because yeah, those things are so interconnected.
Yeah.
I have a question from Ali. Actually, it's on LinkedIn, but I rebroadcasted it through X because I wanted to see and make sure if our comments from Twitter or X are working. And as you can see, they are. So it's actually not my question, it's Ali's question. He was asking, how do you stay motivated and resilient during tougher times in sales field? I think this is kind of like this big like scarecrow for everybody who is considering sales career about like tough times, like not making enough money with commissions, like economic shifts in the market in general that will make your job not as lucrative as it could be. So it's a great question. Like how do you stay motivated, and what does resilience look like for sales?
Yeah. So specifically within sales, I think that from a tactical perspective, the most important thing you need to do is you need to focus on the inputs and not the outputs. And so the inputs you can control, and that means how hard you're working. That means the types of businesses that you're choosing to approach or reach out to. You can control your inputs as far as how prepared you are for a conversation, for a demo or what have you. So you can control your inputs, but ultimately you can't always control the output of, is this customer going to buy? When are they going to buy? All these kind of things. And so I think in sales, you do have to realize that, okay, I control the inputs. So let me, have a plan. Because I think when you have a plan, you're less stressed out, right? Because it's like plan your work your plan. So you plan your work and then you work your plan, and then it's a little bit less stressful because you're not constantly reinventing the wheel every day as far as what you should be focusing on. And then just focus on your inputs, and do the best you can. And anyone who's been in sales, realizes that it's almost like baseball. Like the best players, the Hall of Famers, they bat 300, right? So 70% of the time they're not getting on base. And in sales, even if you have an incredible product, you're still going to go through a lot of conversations and a lot of cycles where it's either a no or a no for now. And you just have to be okay with that. And you have to be like, hey, I did everything I could here and it's not the right timing or what have you. Or maybe they just kind of made the wrong decision from my perspective, but I'm not going to be mad at them. I'll stay in touch with them, and you just move on to the next one. And so, I think that's how I've stayed motivated. Focus on the inputs, have a plan. I mean, I remember one of the times I was really stressed out from a sales perspective. I was just like, it was the end of the month. I didn't know what I was going to do. Didn't think I was going to hit my number. And I went for a walk and I called my dad, and I was going on and on and on about how stressed out I was. I don't know if I'm going to hit my number. And by the way, I would very rarely have these types of conversations with him. It wasn't a normal thing. And he said to me, well, if you're stressed out, it's because you don't know what you're doing. And I was like, okay. I was like, thanks for the advice, Dad. Appreciate that. But then he said, but you do know what you're doing. Like, you do know what you're doing. And so you shouldn't be stressed out. You just have to go in there and keep working, and you know what you're doing. Don't let anyone convince you that you don't know what you're doing, because you do. And I think that's important, just sort of the confidence. And of course, having people who can build you up every once in a while, like my dad did in that case, or hopefully you've got a good manager or a coworker or something like that.
That's awesome. I love it. It's like so bold and true. Like you're nervous, you just don't know what you're doing. I mean, yeah, I love it. I see some other comments here that kind of say, plan your work your plan. Love this, Pete. You're a legend. That's true. You are.
Hey,
You're a
John.
legend.
Good to see you. Please come to Austin, John. I'd love to see you. It's been many years since I think we had coffee on Haight Street in San Francisco. So it'd be good to see you.
Yeah, we would love to host you guys in our
South
studio.
by? Yeah, South by. Maybe you'll be out here for that.
Yeah, great weather to visit Austin. And Alex from Restream, also another Alex, says, look at the squids. I'll be there, says John. Here, now we have it recorded, by the way.
Good.
So
I'm gonna hold you to
will
that,
stay on
John.
LinkedIn. So yeah, you just
I'll send you a message.
You just made a commitment, John. Thanks for doing that. So before we wrap up, I would like to do one crazy thing, my favorite. I'm going to post a link to join this stream. So if anybody wants to go ahead and join us radio style and ask their question in person with video right in the middle of this stream, we will actually take one video question. So I posted the link to the channels, and I also posted it in LinkedIn for people who are watching on Pete's page. So feel free to click it. And while we're waiting for the brave heart who would do that, I think we can once again take another question that was submitted earlier, talking about old times, good old times. So the question is, recall a favorite moment from the good old days, whenever that is for you. Uh, that was the moment, and why you think you are so fondly looking back at that. It's an interesting kind of
Yeah. Well,
reason.
I have this, saying that the good old days weren't actually the good old days when you're living them, right? And so, people would always talk to me about the good old days, when I was working at Yelp and there's only 20 of us or what have you. But, again, I was, sleeping on my sister's couch. We didn't know if we had enough money to make it another couple years, although the company was very good at fundraising and everything. But, it was very stressful. It was very hard. I wasn't getting paid a lot. So actually, I think in the moment, it maybe wasn't the good old days, right? I was sort of always thinking about the future and how can we get to this next stage. And, you think about where you're at right now, like the idea of, I mean, even taking a vacation at the time, I was like, A, I can't afford it. B, I can't take the time off. And so, I don't know if those were the good old days. But you look back on them and, you feel proud of the work that you did. And I think that's really, important. So I think the thing that matters more is not hey, the good old days and what have you. It's whatever you're doing today, whatever you're doing right now, just doing it the best you can, putting everything into it. Without grinding yourself, into the ground, doing it in a way where, you can wake up and feel good in the morning. Because ultimately you do want to be able to look back on what you did, and you do want to be able to feel proud about the work that you did at that time, and you do want to look fondly at it and like, hey, that was a good time and I worked really hard and some things worked out, some things didn't work out, but that's okay. So there's my advice. Of course, I have all sorts of great stories, and oftentimes it's the things outside of work, right? It's the dinners that you had or the work trips and the different things that you had to do and how you got to know people and things like that. Those are the things that oftentimes you remember. So, you encourage people to, try and make that time to do that. So anyway, I'll leave
Yeah.
it at that. But um,
Yeah, totally. While we are figuring out, we actually have a guest appearance here in just a minute. We're just making sure that everything works just right for our checking in guest. I also have one quick question for you before we transition to the live question. Since we're talking about career and sales, like I always
mhm.
like to know, like if there's one favorite interview question that you like to ask when you're hiring salespeople, and what is that question? And if you can give some pointers at like what exactly you're probing on, I think that would be very helpful for folks who are joining us in order to kind of advance in their career.
Yeah. So one question that I love to ask when I'm interviewing for management positions, when I'm hiring for a manager, is what happens if you don't get this job? So, you're normally interviewing someone who's an individual contributor, a salesperson at your company, and you say, hey, what happens if you don't get this job? And I just gave it away. So now if I'm interviewing someone for a manager role, you'll be prepared, for that question. But I always like to ask that. And the reason why I ask that is because, you don't want them to say like, oh, well, first off, they should have self awareness that they may not actually be getting this job. They should have a certain level of self awareness around that. And if they don't have self awareness around it, if they don't realize that, hey, it's going to be competitive or what have you, then that's a bad signal for someone who you want to be a manager, right? And then of course you want someone to say like, hey, I'll listen to whatever feedback you have for me. I'll be open ears and want to go and implement that and then give it another shot. When you're hiring again. And so I think the ability to sort of take in feedback, take in coaching, be willing to listen, a self-awareness that, hey, maybe there are things I'll need to work on when I get the job. So I need to be able to work on those things now. I think all that stuff is really, really important. And so I always ask that what happens if you don't get the job, when people interview for management positions. As far as, sales rep positions, I'm not sure if I know I have a couple go-tos, but they're sort of escaping me right now since I talked about the other one, for managers. So I'll just leave
That's
it at that.
great. No, that's great. I think that's a great answer. And yeah, like very, it's funny that you kind of gave it away, but yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe you'll ask it, maybe you don't. Maybe there are others that are still worth checking by applying to sales roles at Restream and
Yeah.
interviewing with Pete.
I do like to keep people who are interviewing for sales roles on their toes. So I will say some pretty, unexpected things. Like obviously everything's HR approved.
Yeah,
But you do want to put someone on their toes a little bit in a sales interview, because that's what they're going to have to do all day long talking to customers, right? They're going to have to think on their feet. And so you do want to see how they can do that in an interview setting. So I got some zingers in there that I'll keep in my back pocket.
do you ask us crazy questions like that are kind of like impossible to resolve on the fly? Like I know some engineers like to ask things like, give me like the radius of the earth in like the increments of your own height, like that kind of stuff that is just literally
Mm,
impossible to do, and just to see their thought process and just to see if they give up or they try, like that kind of stuff at all.
no, because I don't know the answers to those questions anyway. So I'm not gonna put that on someone else. I mean, I'll give it a little bit away. Like one of the things I do like to say is basically tell people that I'm not sure if this role is the right fit for you based off of what you've shared with me so far.
Huh.
And just put that out there, because oftentimes you are actually thinking that, like, how
Yeah,
would you be 100% on someone after 30 minutes, right?
yeah,
So I like to see how they respond to that. I'd like to see, okay, are they willing to maybe ask me some questions? Are they willing to highlight some of their experiences? Are they willing to take that extra step in the interview setting? So sort of challenge them a little bit and see how they respond. So again, I gave that one away, but
awesome.
yeah.
I love it. I think it's great. And with this, we are coming to a very exciting live radio question.
Cool.
uh,
Let's
call
do it.
in type. We have Brave Mary here, so I'm going to toggle her in. Hi, welcome.
Hey, I
So,
recognize
Pete,
that face. Hey, man.
how are ya?
So good to see you. It's been a while.
It is so good to see you too.
Ah,
And
thank you for calling in. I appreciate
yeah, no, any chance to hear your wisdom is good. And
it.
I could definitely attest to Pete throwing some zingers in the interview process. So he's gotten me before. Um, so my question is, what would be your advice to individual contributors that have been in that role for a really, really long time? They've been successful there. And because of it, they might be getting encouraged to move into a management or a leadership role, but they don't think that's the right fit. Um,
Hmm.
I guess what's your, with career progression, do you feel that it's necessary to move into a leadership role, or do you think you can have a really strong sales career staying in that IC role?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm glad you asked it, because I think a lot of times people sort of maybe just think about that one path, or maybe they just think about the path that's maybe immediately in front of them just because of the company that they're at and the situation or what have you. And that's totally normal, right? And sometimes we do need to jump, at those opportunities when they present themselves. But to do that, it's a major change. And having some hesitancy around that, is first off, it's a sign, right? You're like, okay, like maybe I should think about this a little bit more deeply. The answer is you definitely don't have to move into leadership to have a great career in sales. And that said, you have to be at the right company, in the right industry where there's an opportunity for you to continue to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so meaning, and the question is, how do you want to grow, right? So do you want to make more money? And if the answer is yes, then of course you need to have roles in that company where you're generating more revenue to the company. Therefore, you can get paid more. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how the numbers are looked at. They're like, this role generates X amount in revenue, and we pay a certain percentage in compensation, base and commission, to the teams. And so when you've got an enterprise salesperson who, is going to make 300, 400K or whatever that is, throw a 5X on top of that for a new salesperson. And so, you're going to have $1.5, $2 million quota, whatever that number is, and probably a lot more if it's, a client partner who's working with an existing book of business versus a net new accounts person.
Yeah.
So, if the goal is, hey, let me continue to make more money, recognize my value, so on and so forth, the answer is definitely yes. You can do really well. And I mean, Mary, you remember some of the folks I worked with, on the national team. I signed, the commissions every month, and they were making more money than I was, and I was running the whole org. And we, of course, did that very, intentionally, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, but of course that was, they were selling Home Depot and McDonald's and $1 million deals and all this kind of stuff. So I think the question is, if you want to continue to progress in sales, definitely you got to be in the right company, the right industry, and to look for those opportunities. Outside of that, I think salespeople can do really, really well in other departments, such as marketing. Obviously, customer success is right there. I've seen a lot of people move into revenue operations as well, and those types of roles. But it is a little bit of a take one step back to take 2 steps forward.
Yeah.
And so I think you do want to join a company in that situation where the company is really growing. So that 1 step back that you take is maybe a 6 or a 12-month thing, not a 4-year thing, because the company is growing so much that there'll be an opportunity for you to maybe, continue to rise in that role because they're gonna need it. So it's all very personal, but I would definitely say there's great opportunities out there outside of leadership, and probably even I've seen people who've moved into leadership and then moved back out. And I think that's great. And I think we need to encourage more of that. You know what I mean? So anyway, hopefully that helps. Happy to, I don't know if you have any follow-ups to that, but happy to address
Well,
them.
I do we have time for a little follow-up to that?
Sure. Why not?
Sure. Okay. That is really helpful. Thank you. And I think where part of it stems from, as a fellow parent, I have 3 small children. And so I'm kind of trying to navigate, sales was a career I started when I was in my 20s, and I was single, and I was down in San Francisco, and had a lot of, my priorities were different. And so now, you talked about this a little bit earlier, but now I've got this young family to take care of. And sometimes I wonder, where can I make sure to give them my best attention? Is that going to be in an IC role where I can kind of manage my own schedule and you are in a little bit more control of how much money you're making? Or is that in a leadership position where I guess it's just a little bit more of like a stable financial? So I guess, I'm assuming you haven't done an IC role since you've had a child. What would your advice be as to young parents trying to navigate sales career when they started in a very different time of their life and they've now moved into a different part of their personal life? If any advice.
Yeah. I think, ultimately it's I do think finding the right role for where you're at in your life you need to give yourself a decent time horizon to do that. Right. So it's not just, hey, how can I do this in the next 6 months, or how can I even do this in the next year? It's trying to understand it might take some time to find the right role internally, or it might take some time to find the right role at another company or what have you, whatever that individual situation is, and to give yourself that space, to look for those opportunities. Broadly, I do believe that when you mentally put something out there as far as what you want to do or what you want to achieve, you start to see those signals, in the universe for those opportunities. And so putting it out there and thinking about it, you'll find more signals. You can talk to your network and things like that and let them know. But I think giving yourself some time to do that, is important. Because I do think actually in certain companies, the sales leadership they're just as much on the hook, and as an IC is, and they could be gone, or, there could be a change, or, or what have you. sadly, I don't think things, are as stable as maybe they used to be, in that regard. And maybe that's just the nature of this sort of hiring, tons of people, over the past few years, and companies kind of right sizing.
Yeah.
But so I think it actually just depends on the company. I really think it depends on the company. And then, certain companies, they really grind the leadership team, because it's like,
Yeah.
you're a leader here and blah, 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 and you're going to get grinded, and you're dealing with, people issues, nights and weekends. When I was running 365 or more people, it was one person's in my org. It was their worst day of the year every single day.
Right.
When you have that many people in your org, and so those things are landing on your desk, when you're in leadership. And so that can be really, really stressful if that stuff bugs you.
Yeah.
But there's also sort of maybe a little bit more comfort around being in a leadership position and not having that quarterly, the bonus is maybe a little bit more stable on a quarterly perspective.
Right.
I really think those things depend on the company, actually, a little bit. And so finding the right company and finding the way it's structured, as well as whether that's going to be as an IC or a leader, it's a bit of a matrix quadrant thing.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Thank you. That's helpful.
Cool. Well, it's good to see you, Mary. Thanks for jumping in.
See you. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Great question. Thank you
Bye.
so much, Mary. I will follow up with you on LinkedIn because you're brave, and I want to give you a little something from Restream as a little gift. And I also, as a mom of one, I applaud you for 3 kids. You are a superhero. So you're amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah, so that was fun, Pete. I really appreciate your answers. It was great. So we did a little radio style thing. And I guess to wrap it up, is there any last thing that you would like to share? Anything that our audience might have missed? Maybe any way to reach out to you, find you, contact you, or anything that
Sure.
That's useful for you?
Sure. Yeah. So, the best way to reach me is just send me a message, on LinkedIn or on X. I know we're streaming to those channels right now, so you can find me there. If anyone wants to reach out about anything, I'm sort of an open book. What I will say is, as far as to leave people with this is, I think this is a really cool format. We've gotten some fun questions. We just did this as a little test to just try this and have fun with it. And, I'm really encouraged about the authenticity that we were able to sort of get to over the past, hour. And so hopefully maybe we'll do this again. And I would say, if you work at a company right now who is looking for ways to communicate in an authentic way, two-way conversations versus one-way conversations with your audience, with your customers, with your potential customers, I'd encourage you guys to think about doing this kind of thing, because I think it's a lot of fun, and we're starting to see a lot of companies start to do live streaming and two-way conversations, with their audiences. And so whether it's personally or professionally, I'd love to see more people doing this kind of stuff, and hopefully we'll do it again. So thanks everyone for joining.
Absolutely. And thank you, Pete, for all the insights, for also being brave to just do this with me. And we will definitely make sure this is not the last one. So stay tuned for more. Thanks for great questions, for your time, for joining us today. And we'll see you around on social media. Bye.
Bye.